Good morning. My name is Gil McGowan, and I'm president of the Alberta Federation of Labour. I'd like to welcome everyone in the room and all those who are joining us online. This is a press conference, but it's also a statement to Alberta. After we've heard from a number of presidents, we will take questions. But today I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Alberta Federation of Labour respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory in central Alberta, a traditional gathering place for the diverse Indigenous peoples of our land: the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We recognize the history of oppression of First Nations people, Métis, Inuit, and all Indigenous people in their traditional land across Canada, and we are committed to doing the ongoing and active work of reconciliation. We also recognize that we are all treaty people with treaty obligations and are committed to continue to living in accordance with the spirit and intent of peace and friendship that is foundational to the treaty relationship. As a labor movement, we will actively work together in solidarity to end oppression and seek justice for all peoples of this land. This morning, I'm joined today by Heather Smith, President of the United Nurses of Alberta, Mike Parker, President of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, Rory Gill, President of the Canadian Union of Public Employees Alberta Division, and Elizabeth Johansson, President of the Non-Academic Staff Association at the University of Alberta. The Alberta Federation of Labour is our province's largest worker advocacy group, representing more than 175,000 unionized Albertans in both the public and private sectors. The presidents who are joining me today are well known to most of you, and they lead some of the biggest unions in our federation and in this province. Together, we're here to make an announcement on behalf of all of the members of the Federation unions, an announcement that we think will shape the political and labor relations landscape in our province for the next few years. In a nutshell, we've come to the conclusion that we have no choice but to fight Jason Kenney, and we're asking all Albertans to join us. The Premier wants to frame opposition to his government as a battle between the UCP and so-called union bosses and union NDP surrogates. But the truth is that the UCP has picked fights with an unprecedented number of Alberta groups and individual Albertans, regardless of their political stripe. They've also launched an attack on many things that Albertans hold dear. So it's not Kenney against unions, it's Kenney against or Kenney against the NDP. Instead, it's Kenney against healthcare, Kenney against education, Kenney against parks, AISH, and the environment, and it's even Kenney against a responsible response to COVID. In short, the Kenney government has launched a war on Alberta, and we think it's time for Albertans who also think that he's launched this war to start preparing themselves to fight back. The healthcare workers who walked off the job on Monday showed us what's possible. They showed us that citizens working together can stand up, speak out, and push back. But the end of the Wildcat also showed us that isolated groups of workers can't do it alone. The fight back has to be bigger, and it has to be sustained. That's why we're here today. We're asking all Albertans to join us in building towards something bigger. To get the ball rolling this morning, we're launching what we call the Stand Up to Kenney Campaign. Through this campaign, we're asking all Albertans, union and non-union, working or not, to do three things. First, we're asking people to visit our campaign website at www.standuptokenney.ca and take the I'm Ready to Stand Up to Kenney pledge. By taking the pledge, people will be indicating that they're ready to take part in province-wide protest actions. These protest actions will include rallies, demonstrations, both in person and online, and they may include work-related protests like workplace strikes and even a province-wide general strike. Second, once enough Albertans have taken the pledge and joined the campaign, we'll see who's with us, then we'll create a coordinating committee of all of our allies. That committee will finalize a list of demands, and then we'll demand that the Kenney government sit down and negotiate with us to address our concerns. Third, If the government doesn't respond to our concerns, we'll begin a series of virtual, regional, and province-wide protests that could include work stoppages. These actions will be separate from individual contract-related actions organized by individual public sector and private sector unions in the context of their contract negotiations, but they will be mutually supportive and they may coincide. To be clear, mass in-person protest action will not begin until it can be done safely in the context of the pandemic. But we are urging people to sign up now so we're ready to move quickly and decisively when it is safe to do so. We also want to stress that you do not have to be a union member or even a worker to participate. This is about all Albertans standing up to defend our province from a government with a tin ear, a cold heart, and an agenda that is shockingly regressive, disturbingly ideological, and the very opposite of what's needed during these difficult times. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Rory Gill, President of the Canadian Union of Provincial Public Employees in Alberta. Rory?
Thank you, Gil. Now, the list of intolerable actions taken by the Kenney government's long, and it grows every day. While other governments around the country and around the world have been doing everything in their power to help their citizens through the COVID crisis, the Kenney government here in Alberta has chosen to use the pandemic as a cover to implement an aggressively ideological agenda. They're chasing doctors out of the province and handing layoff notices to 11,000 healthcare workers during a pandemic. They're keeping our kids and education staff in schools and classrooms without adequate supports or protection. They're laying the groundwork for privatization in our public education system by using increasing amounts of public money to fund private schools, giving billions in handouts to corporations while saying the cupboard is bare for vital public services like healthcare for our sick, education for our kids, and AISH for the disabled. But that's not all. They're also grabbing our pensions and putting the retirement security of millions of Albertans at risk by using CPP as a political prop instead of treating it as what it is, a sacred trust. They're selling our parks, watering down environmental protections, ignoring the disproportionate impact that the COVID crisis has had on women and low-wage workers, downplaying climate change, and ignoring the unfolding energy transition. And just last week, it was revealed that they're planning to take any discussion of residential schools out of the Alberta curriculum and make other aggressive changes which experts say would make our schools a laughingstock in North America. At the same time, they're being cavalier with COVID-19. We're now setting new records for infections. But instead of acting to better protect students and seniors and workers, the government responds with talking points that sounds like they've been lifted directly from a speech by Donald Trump or a Republican governor in a state where COVID's being allowed to run rampant. Finally, over the summer, the UCP passed Bill 32, a law that's brought American-style anti-worker rules to Canada. Bill 32 eliminates overtime pay as we know it for non-union workers, and it's designed to silence workers and rob unions of the resources they need to stand up for workers and act as an effective counterbalance to the power of corporations and hostile governments. But the UCP isn't content to leave it there. At their recent annual general meeting, they passed a resolution to bring in full-blown American-style right-to-work laws to further crush workers' rights and worker bargaining power. These are the laws that have suppressed the wages and reduced the standard of living of working Americans. And they put the American middle class on life support. Why? Why would we want to import these ideas to Canada? Now, in the end, the UCP call themselves conservatives, but they're not conservative. They're radical extremists trying to impose a radical agenda on an unwilling province. Now, we're here to say it's not what Albertans voted for, and it's the last thing we need during a pandemic and a recession. Now, I'd like to introduce Mike Parker from the Health Sciences Association. Mike's going to talk to us now as well.
Thanks, Rory, and thank you all for coming today. For those of us in Alberta's labor movement, and especially for those of us who work in our provincial public healthcare system, the Kenney government is hitting us with a double-barreled attack, and we simply cannot ignore it or stand for it. This summer, they passed Bill 30, the Health Statutes Amendment Act that will open the door to the largest attack on our public health care system that Canada has ever seen. As frontline workers, we see our system up close every single day. We are the professionals in this area, not the politicians. Our members know that it was the public system that is seeing us through this pandemic. This COVID crisis is not a private system that would see the public dollars go to profits rather than to patients. In fact, privatization of healthcare has already begun. HSA has already announced the 11,000 jobs that are going to the private sector, including the privatization of our medical labs. And the government doesn't want us to tell you about it. At the same time, they brought legislation to bring in private health care. They passed legislation to keep unions from talking to our members or to you, the public. And then, just a couple of weeks ago, the UCP passed a resolution to bring American-style, two-tiered health care to Alberta. And Jason Kenney refuses to condemn that policy. We believe that it is our duty as healthcare professionals to sound the alert when Jason Kenney and the UCP try to rip apart our public healthcare system. Because every dollar needs to go to services and not for profits. We have our frontline lab workers working full out. Our paramedics are running code red. Every facility is running full out to protect Albertans. This is the wake-up call. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Johansson from the Non-Academic Staff Association, University of Alberta.
This government is also imposing unprecedented cuts that will turn our world-class universities, colleges, and technical institutions into shadows of their former selves. At the University of Alberta alone, we've seen the government cut 1/3 of government funding to Alberta's flagship institution since being elected. The university has been left scrambling to respond to deeper and faster cuts than any post-secondary institution in the world has faced. It's meant that more than 1,000 staff are losing their jobs, staff who are critical to supporting students and the kind of world-class research that recently earned a Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, this is the reality for all of Alberta's 26 post-secondary institutions, which are being forced to deal with a 20% cut to provincial funding over just 2 years. As bad as that is, there are concerns that even more cuts are on the way. At a time when we should all be focused on supporting our students during the shift to online learning, and our researchers should be focused on finding solutions to COVID-19 and the coming energy transition, we're instead grappling with massive cuts and restructuring plans with impossible timelines. At a time when students should be focused on learning online and preparing for Alberta's new economic reality, they're instead trying to figure out how they can afford to pay increased tuition. We know that in times of high unemployment and economic challenges, more Albertans are looking to return to school, to upgrade their skills, and prepare for new opportunities. Rather than supporting these Albertans, the Kenney government is making it harder and more expensive than ever to access higher education. These are not the actions of a responsible government trying to provide certainty and support for citizens in these historically difficult times. Next, we have Heather from the United Nurses.
I'll be brief. The decision of United Nurses of Alberta to step up and offer to help organize the broader public fight against the Kenney government was not made lightly. Our province is in the midst of both a pandemic and a recession. The last thing we need is more conflict and uncertainty. At the same time, despite stereotypes and myths to the contrary, unions exist to compromise and reach deals, not to engage in strikes or confrontation. The proof of this statement is in the simple numbers. Over the last 10 years, 99% of union-negotiated collective agreements in this province have been reached without recourse to strikes. For us, and I've been on picket lines, for us, picket lines, protests, and strikes are a last resort, not a first choice. But that's the problem. Jason Kenney is leaving us and many, many of our fellow Albertans with no choice but to fight back. As unions, we don't have the power of the government or their corporate backers, but we have people. And we have the tools and ability to organize and mobilize. Through this campaign, we are putting those tools and that ability at the disposal of all Albertans who want to stand up to Kenney, and all Albertans who want to stand up for our province. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Gil.
All of this that we've been talking about this morning is why we're launching this campaign. Albertans may have voted for the UCP 16 months ago, but they didn't vote to have their province transformed in the image of a Republican American state. The UCP promised us jobs, but they're destroying jobs, not creating them. They promised a stronger economy, but they're imposing deep cuts in the midst of a punishing recession, cuts which will make our economy worse, not better. Increasing numbers of Albertans from across the province are saying enough is enough. They're saying, don't let Jason Kenney turn our province into Alabama North. And they're saying it's time to push back. Today, the unions and workers who make up the Alberta Federation of Labour are saying, we agree, but we can't do it alone. We're offering to help organize and lead the fight back and the protests, but we need individuals and groups to join us. So if you're concerned, if you're worried, if you're horrified, as we are, about what Jason Kenney and the UCP are doing to our province, then visit the website, take the pledge, and together we will stand up to Jason Kenney. Thank you. At this point, we'd be happy to take some questions from reporters. There is a microphone to my left.
Hi, I guess just simply put, what is the goal here? What are you asking the province to do?
Well, we're responding to a growing demand from ordinary Albertans. We've heard it from our members, we've heard it from our affiliate unions, we've heard it from other groups and people in civil society, and just from ordinary Albertans. They're horrified about what Jason Kenney's government is doing to our province, whether it's healthcare, education, the response to the COVID crisis. And so we're stepping up to the plate, and we're saying to all of those Albertans who are calling out for some kind of organized extra parliamentary protest that we will put our resources, our skills, our tools, our abilities at their disposal to help organize that kind of extra parliamentary protest that they've been asking for. In terms of our demands, on our website, www.standuptokenney.ca, we've listed a dozen demands, which I'll stress are preliminary, because this is going to be a group effort. This is not just unions. We are simply offering to partner with the many Alberta individuals and groups who are as concerned as we are, and together we will finalize a list of demands. But to get the ball rolling, we've presented a list of a dozen specific demands, and they run the gamut. They're the things that Albertans are talking about. So we're demanding that the government, for example, rescind their plan to lay off 11,000 healthcare workers during a pandemic. We're also asking that the government stop their fight with doctors, stop chasing doctors out of the province during a pandemic. Those are just two examples, but we have similar demands of the government on other issues, from education to environment to our park system, the attack that we're seeing on social services like AISH. It's there on the website. That's a start for a conversation for those who join us in this campaign to stand up to Jason Kenney.
Referencing Monday's work action, the Alberta Labour Relations Board ruled that they acted illegally. How will you avoid any future illegal action?
Well, I want to make it clear that what we're proposing today is not strike action or protest action related to any particular set of contract negotiations. Each of our individual unions will, many of them are at the bargaining table with the government right now. They will continue attempting to negotiate with this government on behalf of their members. And I'll tell you, this government talks about the rule of law. They talk about respecting the bargaining process. But the reality is that despite their talk about the rule of law and the bargaining process, they're thumbing their nose at both of those things. They've torn up collective agreements, which is illegal. They have been hauled before the courts by some of our unions, but also groups like the Alberta Medical Association for violating the law. And they are trampling over the collective bargaining process. But the point that the campaign that we're launching today is a campaign of extra parliamentary opposition and protest against the Premier Jason Kenney and the agenda of his government. It's an agenda that we think is an attack on the public interest of this Alberta. So what we're organizing is a extra parliamentary protest. So this is not. It should not be seen as a strike in the context of bargaining, right? So those will proceed. Those decisions will be made by individual unions with their members in the context of bargaining. And so if there are strikes in the context of bargaining, they would be in addition to and separate from what we're announcing today.
And just to clarify, if you could, you're trying to create a committee of allies. So is
Yeah.
this just an open call to
Yep.
Albertans?
It's an open call. We take the unions in Alberta are part of civil society, and we take our role in civil society very seriously. And what we've been hearing from other groups in civil society, like environmentalists, like student groups, seniors groups, people are concerned about parks and services like AISH. Everyone has a beef with this government. They've launched a war with many fronts. They've launched attacks against many groups of Albertans, many individual Albertans, and there is an appetite out there. And I think everyone can feel it. There's an appetite for opposition outside of the legislature. And what we're saying today is that as the labor movement, we're willing to help organize that opposition outside the legislature, but we're also acknowledging that we can't do it on our own, nor do we think that we should. We want to partner with other groups and individuals who are calling out for action and put our tools and our abilities at the disposal of broader civil society to start that fight back that so many people in this province have been waiting for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from the Edmonton.
Sure. So there's a question from the Edmonton Journal. Yeah, go ahead. Well, I want to stress that we're talking about right now is preparing for province-wide protests that may include work stoppages. So we are not today calling for work stoppages. We are not today calling for a general strike where all we're doing is calling for people to come together and prepare for mass protest action against this government and its agenda. But in the context of the pandemic, we're not going to be calling people together in large numbers, but we do want people to come together online, indicate their support for our campaign to stand up to Kenney so that we can move very quickly once it is safe to do so. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us. And for those of us watching on the internet through our live feed, please visit our website, www.standuptokenney.ca, and let's get this ball rolling. Thank you for joining us.